Oliver, I'm so excited to be sitting down here with you at the common table here in Venice. And today we're going to be talking about soil and spirituality and where they come together at the intersection of food and fashion. So I love this subject. I know you just got back from India and you have lots of amazing experiences to share with us. But to kick it off, let's just talk about the common thread here, which is soil. Why is soil the common thread, and why?
First of all, thank you so much for having me, Julie. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you for bringing more attention to these really important issues. And as we think about food and clothes and population growth and climate change and illness and pollution and all of the challenges and opportunities that we as humanity are facing and will face in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, everything comes down to soil. Everything comes down to soil. Over 98% of everything that we eat and wear comes from soil. And soil hasn't historically been known as a super sexy thing. It hasn't gotten the attention that it's always deserved. But as you know, our production company, Common Table Creative, we have traveled all around the world filming with farmers and also spoken to climate scientists and educators and policymakers about what the future of food looks like. And most recently, we were in India working on a sustainable fashion project. And what I've come to understand through talking to farmers, through visiting dozens of farms all around the world, is that we are soil at its core. And I know that sounds silly, but if
that's the name of our podcast.
Exactly. So if you think about it, and this is, I'm not a farmer myself, but I've been able to film with all of these farmers, and food is our most natural, our most intimate connection with the natural world. We are literally ingesting something that comes from soil and putting it into our body, and then we become that.
Right.
At its very, very fundamental.
We are what we eat.
We are what we eat. And if you think about that, an apple, in one sense, is just an apple. But an apple is also the sun and the soil and the human capital and the energy and the water that went into making it. So it's so much more than that. And some people have started to realize that soil is the foundation of our food system. And it absolutely is. And I've also come to realize that soil is the foundation of clothing as well.
Yeah.
This idea of who grows your clothes. And one thing that I think is so fascinating, and people don't quite realize that, our skin is the biggest organ in our body. And what we put on our skin seeps into us and also becomes us.
No doubt.
But every bit of clothing that you've ever worn, except for leather, but that also comes from cattle, which grazed grass from soil.
Right.
Everything that you've ever worn or eaten comes from soil. So soil is our common thread.
Yeah.
It is our common cause. And as we think about soil, I think it's important to put things into context, globally speaking. And if you look at historically, civilizations for the past several thousand years, from the Romans, the Greeks, Mesopotamians, Egyptians, all of these civilizations thrived because they were able to produce enough food to feed their people. And when they tapped out at that capacity, they would conquer more land, they would go and get more land so they could grow more food to feed more people. And all of these civilizations, every single one of them, which has risen, gotten to a crest, and fallen, ultimately failed in part because they failed to take care of their soil. Now, there's a lot of other complex geopolitical reasons that all of these civilizations ended up not doing well, but at its core was they failed to respect the carrying capacity of the land. And we, now in 2020, are also looking down the barrel at a very drastic situation. So if you think about 98% of everything that we do eat and wear comes from soil at its core. We also know that in 2015, the UN, the United Nations, came out and said that based on the rate at which we are degrading our topsoil, largely due to industrial agricultural practices, this is for food and growing fiber to make clothes, we have 60 harvests left.
Wow.
Today, in 2020, we have 55.
Wow.
So to be clear, we can get one harvest a year, sometimes two. So we have between 30 and 55 years more of harvests.
Because the microbiome of the planet is thinning so drastically?
Exactly, because hardcore industrial agricultural practices use a lot of synthetic fertilizers and a lot of pesticides. And what that does over time is degrades the organic quality of the soil organic matter, and says, we're not going to add natural things like compost. We're not going, which is how historically farmers have been able to bring life back into soil using
not with monocropping.
Not with monocropping. Yeah. Historically, traditionally, soil continues to get fed by largely cow poop and other ruminant animals. Yeah. Cow poop and goats and chickens, to a degree, have really, really nutritious poop. Yeah. And so their poop
they're supposed to be a part of the chain.
They're a part of the system. And so historically, that poop has been collected. It has been mixed with other organic matter, like tree clippings, other things that have kind of fallen and decayed. And that has been what, after we've harvested, we've sprayed a thin layer over all of our fields, and that helps restart the organic process in the soil that brings life back into the soil.
It's like a rebirth. Yeah, it's beautiful, the cycle of life.
Life, and there is life and death, and there's death and life, and it is this ongoing cycle. And in the 60s and 70s, during the Green Revolution, humanity stopped that cycle. We said, hey, we found out that with a couple different components, we could grow a ton of food using synthetic fertilizers.
Meaning we're so much smarter than science, or science is so much smarter than nature.
Yes. Humans started to believe that we are here to dominate nature. Now, this started further back during the scientific revolution, but it really came to its head during the Green Revolution. And we said, hey, we don't need all these. We don't need to do organic compost. We can just take synthetic material and pump soil full of it. And what that has done over time has made plants incredibly weak, has made soil weak. And because once you start filling fields with synthetic fertilizers, once you plant plants in those fields, because the plants are growing in soil that is unhealthy and full of chemicals, that plant is unhealthy. And so that plant is less able to withstand the incoming pests and critters that are part of an organic system. And because of that, you've got to continually spray pesticides all over and herbicides all over these plants. So it's this self-perpetuating cycle. Because the soil is unhealthy, you put plants in, those plants are unhealthy, they require more chemicals, and because they can't grow, next year you've got to add more fertilizers. And it's an addiction. A lot of the farmers that we've spoken to who have at one point grown things conventionally, I don't know what they call it conventional, but that means synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, they have said to us that growing things organically and regeneratively and mimicking nature is the only way to bring soil organic matter back to the farm. And so a big part of our work has been trying to understand how these chemicals came into our fields, how they've been used at a massive scale for the past 5 decades at this point, and what the impacts of the Green Revolution have been around the world, in Asia, in India, in the United States, in Central America, to understand what the state of our soils are.
Right. I don't want to get too far off of topic here, but I do think it's important to recognize that a lot of the crops, for instance, in regards to fashion, let's take cotton, for instance, it seems as though a lot of cotton farmers don't exist in America any longer. And I don't know if that's specifically because of this pesticide issue and what the pesticides have done to the earth, or it has more to do with money. And perhaps they've found crops that are making more money, and that's why they've eliminated the cotton. Because, even the Uzi top from New York that I have on right here, I asked them, where does the cotton come from? And they said, unfortunately, there are no farmers left creating cotton in America. So I think we're dealing with more than just a toxicity problem. We're dealing with unconscious capitalism issue that's fueling the inability for companies that are in the U.S. to even be able to get U.S. cotton. So again, I don't want to go too far off from the game plan for our talk today, but I do think that, beyond toxicity, we're dealing with unconscious capitalism. So did you want to speak to the types of fabrics and such that are being imported from other countries, and why that has happened to the degree that it has?
For sure. So, we just spent two weeks on a regenerative cotton farm in India.
Amazing.
As you know, and this is this piece of land, and it's kind of a microcosm for what's going on in the whole area. But this piece of land, for the past 50 years, was farmed conventionally, a ton of chemicals, and now they're transitioning it to regenerative. A local fashion company we're working with here called Christy Dawn formerly made dresses out of dead stock fabric, which was fabric that was going to go to waste. And so they were a big part of the solution, but then they ultimately realized that they could and wanted to be a bigger part of the solution and grow their things regeneratively. So what I've come to understand about cotton is that cotton needs to grow near the equator. It needs to grow near the equator. So that is largely where it's grown. But if you think about what cotton is usually turned into, it usually is turned into clothes worn during the winter parts of the year.
Right.
So you just by the very nature of cotton itself, it's grown in places that are closer to the equator, Central America, India, etc., and it's worn by places that are a little bit colder. So you automatically have this global crop, automatically.
Right.
And we are living in an increasingly globalized world.
Yes.
And I think that we need to find some degree of balance between localism and trade.
Definitely.
And say, as much as we can, we want to grow things here locally in the United States to supply fashion companies, to supply clothing, whatever it is that we're making cotton out of. We also need to understand that we do live in a deeply interconnected world. And maybe there are opportunities for the East to support the West in growing certain things and vice versa. I did ask this company, what could we grow this cotton in the United States? And they said that right now it is just so beyond cost prohibitive that it would be over $1,000 dress, which is also not fully doable.
And why is that? Because of the cost of the land?
I think it's the cost of the land. I think it is because the systems are not set up to favor those kinds of conditions. It's labor, it's land, it's the fact that there likely isn't as much of a demand for it yet, especially related to fashion, because fashion as well, the fashion industry has been defined, just like the food industry, for the past couple decades by fast fashion,
right.
Especially in the past 2 decades, by how do I get what's in season. There used to be 4 seasons in fashion, and now there's 52 seasons, and the average garment is worn, I think, between 7 and 9 times.
Wow.
Which is ridiculous.
What a waste.
What a waste. So we are starting to see, if we look at the food world, we are starting to see more organic and regenerative farms in the United States because there's more demand.
Right.
There's more awareness and more understanding. So the more that we create a pool of understanding and demand for local farmers, for regenerative farms, the more likely it is that farmers will be able to produce the goods at that cost.
Right.
The fashion industry is still very much in the early stages of this transition.
Yeah.
I believe fully that the food industry is in the midst of this revolution that is happening. You are a part of it. I'm a part of it. All of these amazing food entrepreneurs and innovators and farmers and policy makers
about our future.
Yes, yeah. And the public is waking up. There's so many great films and media out there. That's why we as a company try to bring these stories to the world. So there's more awareness in that world. The fashion component of this is still very new. And I don't think that there's enough demand yet to make growing cotton, in this country regeneratively that feasible yet. When I was in college, I actually started a fashion company, and we made socks and pocket squares. And I wanted to do made in America socks. So we actually sourced Supima cotton from Arizona.
Wow.
Looking back, I definitely don't think it was organic. It certainly was not regenerative. At that point in my earlier years, I didn't even think to ask the question. Sure. This is before I had my revelation about soil and food. So cotton is grown in the United States, but it is still grown the way that industrial corn and soy is grown. So it is basically grown in a very cheap way. And the parallels that exist there are as following. When you start with fertilizers and pesticides, you are maximizing next year's profit, to bring in more chemicals, more spray, maximize yield. Now, is the corn and soy healthy? No. Is it devoid of
minerals?
Is it devoid of micro, macro nutrients?
Yeah.
Yes. But does it look full and big and like something you could sell? Yes. I think the same thing has happened with cotton. And the same thing has happened with other fibers. They're being mass produced in a way that is toxic to the environment, that is not paying the workers a fair wage. And, as we know, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Right.
So when you start the chain in a way that is synthetic and pesticide driven, and you're not treating the people right, that works its way up the system.
Well, hasn't that been happening for generations? I mean, look back to the slave era, and how those people and how far we've come in regards to just, the way people are treated. But it sounds like we haven't made a lot of headway in a lot of other factors.
Totally. And this country's economy was built on the backs of slavery, which was built on cotton. Mm-hmm. And that is a truth that we as Americans need to look at and have serious conversations about and be honest with ourselves about.
Right.
And
maybe ask the question, is what I'm wearing toxic even to my health?
Yes, and I would argue that it is. If you are buying, again, your skin is your biggest organ in your body. So just like food, if we are eating food that is grown in chemicals and highly processed, and we put that in our bodies, we are getting some amount of calories, but we are also poisoning ourselves, frankly, over the long term. Mm-hmm. One of a farmer that we filmed with in the Bahamas, who I really, really like, has said, if you have a little drip of cyanide, every day for a couple of years, it might not kill you right away, but in 20 years, 30 years, you're going to have all of these problems. Same thing is true with all of the processed food, all of the junk food, all of the fast food, all the soda, the sugar. It may not, kill you in the first couple of years, but 20, 30 years down the line, you're going to start having all of these cardiovascular issues, diabetes, obesity. So it's a slow, painful thing.
Right.
Similarly with fashion, I think there still need to be so many studies done, and we're still in the beginning of this fashion revolution that I really truly believe is happening, or is about to happen.
We're seeing so many companies make things out of water bottle caps.
Totally.
So we're seeing it happen.
Totally. So yeah, it's exciting to see that happen, and why I love so much working with Christy Dawn is they're not just thinking about how do we take what's already been wasted and find a new life for it, which I love. I think upcycling things is brilliant, and that needs to happen, and that's great. But how do we grow clothes in a way that participates in the stewardship of our planet? How do we get people to realize that through not only their food choices, but through the fashion companies they choose to support, that we can all play a radically important role at a time when it is more needed than ever in shaping the trajectory of our world?
And we don't need to have walk-in closet upon walk-in closet of clothes these days. I mean, I have always thought that the French woman way of living is the way to go. You have 7 dresses, 10 dresses max, and 3 pairs of shoes, and you just cycle through those things because you're supporting it might cost a little bit more to have something that, really stands up and lasts that long. But how good it feels to align yourself with a company, with where stuff comes from.
Mm-hmm.
If we could all step away from this fast fashion, fast food idea and say, if I could just have 1 outfit or 3 outfits that are made from companies that I know are supporting our planet, if we all did that, what a big difference it would make.
Totally. And how many outfits do we really wear anyways? Even, I'm a guy always, but even if I have, 10 button downs, I'm only going to wear like 2 of them, really.
Right.
3 of them, maybe.
I think they say
consistently.
If you haven't worn something in a year, that means that you really shouldn't keep it.
Donate it.
You should donate
Totally.
it. Yeah.
And we've got to ask ourselves, who grows our clothes?
Right.
And that question is going to be, I believe that question will become a bigger part of the zeitgeist in America and around the world.
I believe it too. Collective consciousness is certainly elevating.
Totally.
Speaking of that, whenever you have interviewed these farmers around the world, have you spoken to them about how nature is directly related to their own spiritual practice, their own spiritual beliefs? And, I'm kind of interested to hear about how farmers view that, or is that something that you've, especially in India, where there is such a big influence on religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs. So
absolutely, I think we've been on farms now in the Bahamas, throughout the United States, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, in Europe and Germany, and now of course in India, and I found farmers to be the true stewards of our planet. They are the ones who are most deeply in relationship with Earth.
Right.
They co-create with Mother Nature. It's really profound when you think about it. And farmers and also teachers, I think, are some of the most undervalued, underappreciated, and most important people in society.
Absolutely.
And what I've come to realize through speaking to these farmers is that we are nature, and how we treat our soil and how we treat our earth, I believe, is a reflection of our connectedness. And I think if you look back at the past 50 years, how we've been treating our soil, how we've been treating our earth, the negative consequences of that are profound, from environmental destruction to climate change to the huge numbers of obesity and diabetes in the United States, and also, lack of happiness, lack of connection. And I think that stems from a lack of connection and a lack of intimacy with our planet. And, the farmers in India are really... India is a deeply spiritual place. I know that may sound cliche, and I get it, but there's a reason why cliches are partially true. So I was deeply moved by our experience in India, and we were able to spend a couple of days with these amazing farmers, and these were men and women of incredibly simple means. 3rd grade education. We were like the 3rd, 4th, and 5th white people they'd ever seen. Amazing. So I thought we were going to be culture shocked. I can't imagine how they felt. Us coming in with all these cameras and da-da-da.
Were they having their spiritual practice be a part of anything that you saw with the farming?
For sure.
Wow.
So there was also the community temple was on their farm. So it was not only their farm, but it was also this like community gathering place that kept happening. And you would listen to these women talk, and they would say that, again, still you go to the bathroom in the woods, live very simply, cook over an open flame. And they would say, there's a saying in a road, which is where we were, treat your daughter as you would treat your soil. And the idea that soil is life. Yeah. And they would tell us stories about how when they were growing up, they would do these organic practices and they loved farming. For the past 40 years, somebody else owns the land, they're just working it. They were using pesticides and fertilizers, and they would come back home at night and have splotches all over their arms. And they were getting paid a minimal amount to do it, and it was how they survived. But now they've gone back to these organic and regenerative and ancient practices, bringing in compost, bringing in cover crops, and you can feel it in their bones, and they're so excited. They're empowered, and they will walk you out to the field and dig up a handful of soil and say, this is full of life. They will say, previously, the soil, the difference between soil and dirt is the degree to which it is alive.
Right.
And they said, this dirt was dead for the past couple of decades, but because these practices are starting, this soil is becoming alive. And as me and Jamer and Simon, on our last day there, this is going to give me goosebumps. On our last day in India, our last day on the farm, we went and said goodbye to the farmers. This was the last, all the other days there was a ton of people there and a bunch of cameras, but this was the last day we just went to go say thank you. We weren't even filming. And we drove by, we got out, we walked, and they were all in the field kind of harvesting and doing their thing, and we couldn't really communicate. To this point, we had a translator, but we got there, and we kind of just through hand gestures and hugs, just kind of said, thank you so much, we're leaving. And as we were departing, we walked out of the field, walked towards our car, and we turned around. And 5 of these women, if you can visualize this, I know it's a podcast, but 5 of these women were equally spaced out in the middle of this regenerative cotton field. Okay. Hands up in the air in a full prayer in their white outfits. And I wasn't raised like terribly religious, but this was the closest experience I've ever had to feeling the presence of God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. We can all call it different things. Pure grace.
Yeah.
And the 3 of us turned around, and I can't make this up. We all started bawling uncontrollably because we felt their blessings. They knew somehow that we were there and had good intentions and wanted to tell the story about soil. And they sent us their blessings.
That's so beautiful.
In a way that I couldn't even take a photo of it. And I take a photo of everything. And to this day, it brings tears to my eyes, knowing that we shared this bond. We didn't speak the same language. We didn't come from the same part of the world. But we shared this common understanding of the power of soil and the power of plants to heal us.
And they knew for our planet.
And they knew that we were there to tell their story and that we had good intentions, and we could feel that, and they could feel that. And it was powerful. It was powerful. And what we saw in India is what we saw in Germany, is what we saw in the Bahamas, we've seen throughout the United States, is that there is a revolution going on right now amongst farmers, amongst consumers, to say, we don't want chemicals in our food.
Right.
We don't want to eat food that's been grown in chemicals. We don't want to bring that into our system. We don't want to bring that into our body. We don't want the glyphosate. We know that all this BS causes cancer and causes all of these downstream impacts. And all of these farmers, some of which had grown things with chemicals for many years, are starting to realize, they're like, we don't want to do this.
Are they being supported is my question.
Increasingly, yes.
By whom?
Right now, it's the consumers.
Okay. But we need the government.
We need the government.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long I have to talk about this, but I'll be brief.
It's actually really perfect timing with Super Tuesday yesterday.
No, this is great.
We need to be involved. We need to claim our rights, or they have been taken from us,
yes.
And we need to take them back.
Yes. And one of the most powerful things that we can do as individuals is vote with our dollar every day.
Yes.
Yesterday was Super Tuesday. We did our thing voting. That was great. We can vote with our dollars every day to support organic and regenerative agriculture, to support the future of food.
Yeah.
It is one of the most powerful things that we can do.
Yes.
Because the same system that was put into place several decades ago, the synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, was directly supported and is continually subsidized to this day by the United States government.
Right.
The U.S. government directly pays farmers to grow huge amounts of corn and soy, and wheat to a degree, but largely corn and soy.
With pesticides.
And the way that you maximize your yield is to use synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. So our government is indirectly or directly, depending on how you look at it, subsidizing this devastating erosion of our soils and incentivizing the growth of unhealthy food that, because we have such an abundance of corn and soy, like huge amounts, it has become over the years the foundation for processed food, for fast food, and for animal feed.
Yeah.
And so cattle, which we now know are an important part of regeneration, and we now know that animals at a certain scale are actually incredibly beneficial to agriculture because they do their thing. They do their thing. Yeah. They walk around. They eat the grass, which helps sequester carbon. They also fertilize the fields with all of their poop.
Yeah.
So animals are an important part of agriculture, and they will be moving forward. But all of this corn and soy, we transitioned from animals grazing on grass, which is what they're meant to eat, to force feeding them corn and soy, which had the impact of making meat and dairy really inexpensive, artificially so.
And really unhealthy.
Yeah. Not that, again, there's the health component of eating meat, there's the environmental component, and then there's a personal component.
Right.
I don't believe in telling people what to eat or how to eat.
Me neither.
I think we need to talk about, honestly and truly, the health implications of eating certain types of meat, especially if it's highly processed and filled with, what's it called?
Different kinds of chemicals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
in growth hormones and all that kind of thing.
Growth hormone, antibiotics.
Antibiotics.
Such,
Thanks.
yeah,
There's the word. There's the word. And then the environmental impact. The environmental impact of eating meat that comes from an industrial source, a big concentrated feeding operation, is horrible. Yeah. The animals are treated horribly. They're full of antibiotics. And that is one of the most devastating aspects to our food.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the health. Let's talk about the environmental aspect. And then the moral aspect of, do you feel okay with eating animals? That's a very personal decision. I leave that up.
Not if they're tortured.
Not if they're tortured.
And I think that's a big part of the problem.
Totally.
I grew up on 44 acres of land with my Italian grandparents that, we killed everything that we ate, and I didn't really eat a lot of beef or chicken until I went to college because we ate everything off of the land. And those days, unfortunately, are getting less and less for so many people with this globalization issue and, people wanting to have fast food and, like we talked about, fast fashion. And it's so wonderful to be having this discussion and bringing some awareness to folks that might not even be aware that what they, shopping at Forever 21 and getting a new outfit every 2 weeks really might not be good for your health, and it's certainly not good for the health of the planet.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
And by the way,
very important.
And by the way, you look like everybody else.
Exactly.
Which is not so chic, which is the point of what you're trying to do. So that's kind of a joke, but also not really. You're going to be much better off if you go to a great secondhand store and find something that's totally unique to you and give it a second life versus looking like every single other person who gets that the $6 blouse. Yeah,
I know a lot of people tend to have a doomsday sort of negative viewpoint on this. Like, how are we ever going to get back to, where it needs to be? And they're thinking about the fact that seeds, for instance, if a seed blows and chemicals blow from a non-organic farm into an organic farm, it's affecting the genetic makeup of those organic seeds. So in essence, like we're transforming all of our seeds around the world into seeds that don't even exist any longer. Like the old seeds don't even exist any longer because of what's been happening, because of the nature of nature, where things blow and things change. I was thinking about just the GMO effects on the seed to the root, from the flower to the fruit. It's one thing to talk about the health of ourselves and what we ingest, which is, the root or the fruit. But what about the health of those seeds? And that's our future. The seeds are our future.
The seeds are our future. And, like anything, if you coat something in synthetic material, that is what it becomes. And I think right now something like 60 to 70% of all of the seeds are owned by one big company. Formerly Monsanto, now Bayer, since Bayer bought Monsanto. That has devastating consequences.
Really?
Devastating.
Do we have hope?
We do have hope. There are the seed vaults in different parts of the world. There are folks who are bringing organic and heirloom seeds into the world. There is hope, and hope is with the farmers who know that things can be done better and who are saving seeds, who are only buying organic seeds, who are not going to get on this synthetic bandwagon. Because once you get on this synthetic bandwagon, once you get the GMO seed, that in and of itself there's not been a ton of studies to say that that in and of itself is bad. However, it is bad because with that synthetic seed, you need the whole synthetic apparatus that comes with that. Because the seed is coated in chemicals, you need the synthetic fertilizers. And because the seed is now chemically infused and the fertilizers are chemically infused, you have a weak plant that is specifically designed to take more pesticides and weed killers, which is ridiculous. So again, how we do one thing is how we do everything. So when we start with a GMO seed or a synthetic seed, it starts this whole process of synthetic growth. That's not good for any of us.
Yeah, we have to stop. We have to stop it.
We have to stop it. And how we do that is taking our energy and money and resources away from the system that is destroying our planet and producing unhealthy food for people, and putting our money and our energy towards supporting the future of farming, which is local and organic and regenerative.
Let's give people 3 ideas that they can walk away with today in regards to making different choices when it comes to food, and 3 ideas that we could give them into changing maybe some habits around fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give them 3 for food.
Sure.
First, it would be
composting. Composting. So earlier we talked about the fact that we have 55 harvests left, right? The thing that is most helpful for soil, even if you have a land that's been kind of decrepit, it has been proven over and over and over again, and we've been on farms where it's been proven, that a thin layer of compost actually restarts the it restarts the organic process and basically jumpstarts the life in the soil.
Yeah.
So one thing that we can do is think about our food scraps, right? When we throw away an apple core, or we throw away pizza crust, whatever it is, we're not just throwing that away. We're throwing away gallons and gallons and gallons of water, sun, soil, energy, sun energy, and human labor and love that went into making it. Mm-hmm. If we take all of these scraps and we put it in a landfill, mm-hmm. that releases nothing, because the organics are trapped underneath and they actually contribute to global warming. And right now, 40 to 50% of the food that's grown in the United States gets wasted. Imagine if every single house in the United States, and San Francisco is actually kind of leading the charge on this, every single house, every single restaurant, every single apartment had a small compost bin. I'll show you mine in the fridge.
They do in Portland.
We have Portland. We have a compost right outside here.
Yeah.
What happens is all of these nutrients and minerals and all of the elements that went into making whatever the food was, it gets added with yard trimmings, other organic matter, and over the course of 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on how you do it, becomes soil again.
So let's say that we were collecting our compost, yes. And our city here in mm-hmm. Los Angeles decided that they were going to have, the different bins mm-hmm. like Portland has and like San Francisco has. What happens then to that compost? Does it go into a city collective compost?
Right now, there's virtually zero infrastructure for it.
Wow.
So that's been one of the biggest issues is mm-hmm. how do you incentivize and get people to do something unless it is simple to do? We need composting to become what recycling was 20 years ago.
Got it.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So 2 points on this. First, what you can do now, you got to go a little bit out of your way. You can bring compost to your local farmer's market.
Okay.
A company called LA Compost, at least in the LA area, has a number of different sites throughout Los Angeles where you can go drop it off.
Awesome.
You can, if you're really feeling frisky, you can have your own tumbler outside of your house.
I used to have one of those.
You used to have one? We've got one. Filled it up real quick, and then because I cook a lot, and then we had to make another one, and then you can apply that directly to your field. And also, there is going to be a ballot measure. I do a bunch of policy work and advocacy in the state of California. There's going to be a ballot measure for the next general election for the state of California. It's going to be around taxing plastics. And a couple of policy folks that we work with, this is going to be very, very, very important, and I want to talk more about this, but there's going to be a ballot measure that says it's a tax on plastics. Let's
have another podcast whenever we get closer to that to get people fired up about it.
We will. So this is what it is. It is, and this is of course, 1 cent tax on plastics to the manufacturer on all plastics.
Great.
And that goes into a fund. That fund goes to support billions of dollars in composting infrastructure throughout the state of California. So it's like, brilliant. Of course, like that's so, it's not even the consumer that's paying, it's the plastic manufacturers.
Yeah, we're deterring people.
Exactly. So there's a lot of people in the state who are working really, really diligently to help to help develop and create infrastructure around composting. Because what we're going to need is huge amounts of compost to wean all of the fields in California and the United States and eventually the world, but California will have to lead the United States, and the United States will have to lead the rest of the world.
I love it.
We've got to rid all of the farms of their addiction to chemicals. And the only way that we can do that is to replace the toxic fertilizers with organic compost.
So we need a backlog of compost.
Correct.
Got
and
it.
so right now it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar 15-year project to build 16 or 17 statewide industrial composting facilities in addition to more local and regional ones.
So listen, guys, like, you might not have, a plot of land. You might be living in a studio apartment and you're going, well, how am I going to start composting today? Well, I know that Gaiam.com has these really cool kitchen counter crocks with a filter at the top. I used to have one in my kitchen before. It's how I would transport my compost from the kitchen to the tumbler. You could have one of those. Look into lacompost.com or look at, talk to your local farmers, go to the farmers market, start having conversations about compost. What's the second thing that we could
and vote for this new ballot measure as well that we're gonna follow up on.
Yes, definitely.
If you vote at the farmers market, vote on the ballot.
So 3 food things and then 3 fashion things.
Eat more plants.
Got it.
Eat more plants. And I'm not saying you have to be a vegan.
Every kind of plant or organic?
Organic plants, thank you. Organic and regenerative plants.
Yeah, supporting those farmers.
Yes. So, and I'm not saying you need to be a hardcore vegan. You don't need to do any of these things.
Well, if you want to be healthy, you should be eating 80% plants anyway.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's what I advocate for. That's why I talk about being plant-based.
Yeah.
And if that means, and basically what we're doing here is saying, okay, we are going to take, instead of using our dollars to support the industrialized agricultural system, particularly meat, because that's what's cheap and readily available, we're going to take those dollars and we're going to support organic farmers. We're going to support regenerative farmers. And if we do eat meat, which is okay as well, we're going to ask questions about where it comes from. And if a cow or a pig or a chicken comes from a regenerative farm or comes from an organic farm where they are part of the ecosystem and they are not filled with chemicals, they are not filled with antibiotics, they are a healthy part of the ecosystem, they are actually helping to benefit the farm in the long run.
So when you buy organic meat at the grocery store, is it a guarantee that if it says it's organic meat that it's actually coming from a regenerative farm and those animals haven't been mistreated? Or
it's not a full guarantee yet. So the regenerative thing it's an old way of doing things, but the label regenerative does not exist yet in the way that organic does.
So it sounds like another thing that we need to...
Organic regenerative is a label that's coming up now. Yeah. So it's kind of one step further. That being said, if you are going to eat meat, try to find regenerative meat. If not, organic is great. And if you are at a grocery store or you're at a restaurant, ask a couple questions. Hey, where did this come from?
Right.
Was it part of the farm? Where is the farm? Right. Is it somewhere local? Was it shipped from far away? Can you tell me more about the farm? And again, as consumers, the more questions we ask, the more power we have to make change.
Yeah, I mean, we know to shop the perimeter, but this goes beyond shopping the perimeter now. I mean, shopping the perimeter is so like late 90s, like we're at a different state of consciousness now where we need to be thinking much more locally.
Totally.
And beyond even local, but having conversations with the people that are growing our food. So what can we do for fashion? Like, what are 3 choices that we could start making today to support the aspect of our soil where as fashion is related?
For sure. So fashion's still in kind of the beginning stages of this, but some things that I've tried to kind of work into my ethos is buy secondhand. And not only is it the right thing to do from a sustainability perspective, but it's also the right thing to do from a style perspective.
Sure.
You can do so much better and find things that are so much more individual and cool and have so much more character than something bought for $11 on a shelf that 1,000 other people have. So if and when you can, support local, buy secondhand when you can. Second, support the brands that are talking about sustainability.
Right.
And I think those are probably the 2 big ones I have right now.
I shop at a store called Dream Cloud in Portland whenever I go because there's no sales tax.
Amazing.
And Dream Cloud had everything in the store is made by women and all sustainable brands.
Amazing.
And it feels good to walk into that store and to buy a piece and to walk out and know that my dollars went to support other people that have the same mission in mind in the United States.
Exactly. And one of my favorite stores down here is called Vital Hemp.
Oh,
and they make all clothes out of hemp, and I really like that.
That's another whole podcast.
We'll talk about
episode.
Hemp another
we
time.
Could talk about sustainable. Hemp
right?
is amazing.
My Allbirds sneakers are all kind of made of natural materials, and it's still in the beginning stages. But the more consumers ask questions, the more impact we can have.
Yeah.
So, I spent many years in the restaurant business, and grew up in the restaurant business. Did all the different positions and jobs, and we had a rule in the business that if one person spoke up and said something, maybe they didn't like a dish, maybe they didn't like the lights, whatever it was, that usually meant that about 10 people were thinking it.
Right.
Because not everyone feels comfortable speaking up. If 2 people said something, that meant that maybe 10, 15, 20 people were thinking it. And if 3 people said something, we would make a change.
Yeah.
Because we knew that the consumers were the only reason that we were able to stay in business. And if enough people started to ask questions, hey, are you guys composting? Hey, where's this steak from?
Right, where's your cotton come from?
Where's your cotton come from? Why are you guys still using plastic straws? Businesses listen.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think we need to remember. We as individual consumers have profound power to make change in this world.
Yes.
Simply by asking questions.
Yes.
And we can't always, with all of our dollars, do the best that we can, but where we can align with our values does make a difference. And if we go to the grocery store and you say, hey, do you guys have regenerative meat? Maybe the manager says, oh, we don't right now, but let me think about that. They make a note. 3 other people come in that same week and say, hey, do you have regenerative meat? They say, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll talk to the boss. And 5 people said this, maybe 10 people said this. Now, the person ordering is going to be looking at their order and say, this particular type of plants or meat or whatever from this system is, the cheap stuff, maybe it's not doing so well. Maybe we should look at a farm that's supporting this idea. Well, let's just look into this. That's one grocery store. Imagine 2 grocery stores. Imagine 3 restaurants, 5 restaurants, 10 farmers markets.
Yep.
That is that is a powerful wave of change that we have the ability to enact.
Erewhon is certainly doing it.
Sure, exactly. So ask questions.
Yeah.
Be curious. Know that your voice matters, not just in how you vote with your dollar, but how you ask questions and what you care about.
Absolutely.
The more people that ask questions, the more people will be supporting this new system of agriculture, and the more people that do that and system of fashion, the less the price will be for these healthy things.
Yeah.
Ultimately, this revolution starts with the people. And when enough people speak up and businesses start to pay attention, local politicians start to pay attention. And when local politicians start to pay attention and say, hey, our entire constituency cares about this. We don't want plastic bags anymore. We want to support local food. We want to support farmers markets. They're going to start to think differently.
Right.
At the state level, when enough people say that these things matter, politicians have to respond.
Right.
And so it's a trickle-up effect. In this particular government, not a lot's happening as it relates to climate. I'll just leave that there for the moment. When the people speak up, eventually the government listens.
Well, I think the big issue is that people first off need to be aware. So that's what we're doing today, is bringing some awareness to these subjects. And after they have the awareness, you can't not know something once you know it. And the key is to start having conversations and for people to start asking questions. And that's the only way that change can really happen, is it starts with awareness. So thank you so much, Oliver, for talking to us today about soil and where food and fashion intersect with sustainability. This has been an amazing conversation, and I can't wait to talk to you more about our next subject. It sounds like we have a lot left to talk about.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And remember, the power is with each and every one of us.
Yes.
So believe in that and live with that.
We are the soil.
We are the soil. Thank you, Julie.